ESOP participants, this session is about helping you think clearly about that decision, when diversification might make sense, when holding may be reasonable, and how to evaluate the trade-offs. Trevor Gilmore is the CEO of the Menke Group, one of the nation's leading ESOP advisory firms, where he works with founders and business owners navigating succession and liquidity decisions. Peter Newman is the founder of Peak Wealth Planning and a CFA charter holder who helps individuals and families navigate financial questions, especially as retirement approaches.
Just a quick disclaimer, this is not individual tax, legal, financial, or even relationship advice. Please do seek professional guidance from your financial advisor, attorney, or your individual CPA for specific help.
So big picture, what is diversification? It's the ability to transfer out of the ESOP into something else. In order to diversify, that means you have a benefit in your ESOP, and you've gotten that benefit by participating in the ESOP 10, 15, 20, even 30 years. And then the next question is, well, what do you do with that when you're eligible to? We're going to talk about why diversification matters, when to hold stock and when to sell. And it's not a black and white answer. It's very fact-based, individual-based, goals and objectives-based. We're going to talk about how timing and risk impact retirement income. We're going to talk about real-world diversification decisions, and then also how to decide what you should do next. So just at a high level, all you get a form when you're eligible to diversify or take money out of the ESOP, and it's up to you to check that box and indicate where you want that money to go. That's diversification, but the magic comes in, what do you do with it? And that's a fun problem to have. One of the best features of ESOPs is that employees are not paying money to get the equity. It's just additive to your compensation. A simple investment growing at 7% a year over 10 years doubles in value. And we see that with our ESOP clients. Many have grown their business. So think about their ESOP account. It's grown.
That account is tax deferred. How you turn this into an actual paycheck? Most ESOPs will allow you to sell stock back within the ESOP and roll that cash to an IRA or a 401k. When you actually retire, you can use the IRA or 401k to take regular withdrawals and create a retirement paycheck. I thought it would be useful to talk about two examples of nest eggs I have seen from ESOP participants in the 13 years I've worked with different families. On the left, we have a $500,000 nest egg example. They have $100,000 in their employee stock ownership plan account, $300,000 in their 401k, and they have $100,000 in IRA. There's a rule of thumb called the 4% rule. It's not a guarantee, but it's a rule of thumb. And so a $500,000 nest egg, we would expect to generate roughly $20,000 a year in income. The point I wanted to drive home a little deeper is that the original source of the wealth for that nest egg, 20% of it's coming from the ESOP. On the right, we have a $4 million nest egg, but 3.2 million of that is coming from company stock. 80% of the nest egg is ESOP. So their rule of thumb for withdrawals is $160,000 a year, but $128,000, more than six figures of that is coming from the ESOP. Neither one of these are uncommon situations, but the proportions do matter. Employee ownership has many benefits. Trevor, what do you see from your perspective as risks of employee ownership?
You lay out the three key risks here. First one is share value reductions. That means company value is going down. Next up is the concentration risk. You showed the ESOP extremely high balance. Okay, that's a concentrated wealth position in the ESOP. That can be good. That can also be risky. Lastly is the bankruptcy and layoffs. That is always a risk. It's driven by macro trends, micro, what's going on in your own community, and then also technological. And I'll give an example of a phone book ESOP company. Phone books, everyone had one, but do you today? Of course not. If you were working at a company that printed phone books back when Yahoo, Google started replacing all that, you probably saw the value go down each year. The key takeaway here is these risks, they can all be managed properly, but know them.
Absolutely. And the long-term trend may be positive, but you can have ups and downs year to year. Think of vegetable gardening. If you plant all tomatoes in your vegetable garden, you might have a bountiful crop of tomatoes one year, But you could get tomato worms that come and just munch on tomato plants and decimate them. If instead of just planting tomatoes, you plant many crops, that way, if a bug comes along or a weed and it destroys one of the 15 different crops you planted, you'll still have enough to eat. And that's exactly what diversification is achieving, is creating that balance. Portfolio diversification is turning one concentrated stock into multiple investments or potentially multiple future income sources. The employee stock ownership plan was never intended to be the sole wealth building tool or retirement account for ESOP participants. There are many other accounts that you and your family can rely on for retirement. The 401k, an individual retirement account, Social Security, in some cases, pensions, or an annuity, which is like a pension. In many cases, with very successful ESOPs, it can become a very large portion of your future income sources. What are the common milestones folks can think about when they're thinking about getting paid from their employee stock ownership plan?
Diversification is a feature in all ESOP plans. Once you reach the age of 55 and have 10 years in the ESOP, then you can start diversifying out, and then you get a form with your annual statement that says you're eligible to diversify. Do you want to do so? And if so, you check a box and then state how much you want to diversify. The maximum amount for diversification is 25% for the first 5 years. And then the 6th year, you can do up to 50%, and it's cumulative. Lastly, if you stay put, after you diversify, then the next payout is going to happen when you retire. And then that generally means a 5-year payout. Just caveat, take a look at your SPD, summary plan description, to see the exact payouts. But in these examples, we're just working with that standard language here.
And also, most plan documents say what happens if you were to separate because you elected to leave the employer, or heaven forbid someone passes away. The plan documents will specify what would happen. So at Menke, and also with your clients, Trevor, what are the most common diversification options?
You have basically 3 options. First one is stay in the company stock, saying don't diversify. Next one is diversify. So you're going to have the money rolled over to a 401k or IRA. Lastly is cash the check, and this is an option. However, you will owe tax on the withdrawal, plus a 10% early withdrawal penalty if you're under 59 and a half.
One thing to sort of keep in mind to drive this home a little further, even if you do decide to diversify, you're still continuing to grow funds for retirement, just in a different investment vehicle than that single concentrated company stock. We're going to go through a couple of cases, but I thought we should introduce a framework to make this easier, whether we're doing this on our own or getting help. The decision-making framework has 3 lenses. One is urgency. Does this require action now? Do I have to make this decision today? The second is impact. How much does this affect my future income and lifestyle? Alignment. Does this decision I'm making support my family's or my personal long-term plan or vision? Those lenses can really help us when making decisions. These are guidelines, they're not absolute recommendations. Diversification might make sense if your ESOP is more than half of your wealth. Your stock maybe is in a cyclical industry, and maybe the stock is way up and you're 60 years old and haven't diversified yet. If you retire before Medicare age and you need some cash flow, maybe at 61 to pay some health insurance premiums, that could actually be a good reason as well to diversify.
Makes sense to hold if your overall ESOP portfolio is less than 20% of your total holdings. If the company stock that you're working for outperforms a broader market, if you have significant 401k or IRA assets, and lastly, no need for Medicare or Social Security bridge. Also, if you're married or partnered, think about this combined, right? Not just your own individual. And then 2 people working at the same company, one, it can make tons of sense to diversify, and the other, it could make absolutely no sense.
Do you want to talk about our fictional ESOP company?
Yeah, so our fictional ESOP company here, it's West Coast Widget Company. They're a civil engineering firm. They specialize in infrastructure, land development projects. They went 100% ESOP in 1999. Annual contributions going into the ESOP, 10% of salary. Average share price growth has been 10% annual. Company is also doing a 3% match to the K. So 10% for the ESOP, 3% on the K. So overall, that benefits 13%. And then the typical employee is putting in 10% of their wages into the K.
They got the message that the ESOP should not be their only retirement account.
Just good practice to put as much as you can into the 401k because that's your own money and have that grow over time.
David, he's our VP of operations. Do you want to talk a little bit about his situation?
David has been at Widgets now for 15 years. He's age 55 and he's facing diversification. His ESOP account balance is $650,000. He has a 401k balance of $700,000. And then also a separate IRA from a prior employer that's $500,000. And then his salary is $300K. Some other factors here. So his wife has a robust pension. The couple's house is paid off. And lastly, he loves working at West Coast. The company is doing interesting work. He enjoys his career immensely and is open to working till the age of 67.
So sitting down and having a conversation with him, I learned a little bit more information. By the way, I always find this with financial planning. You get one set of facts, then you have a conversation with the individuals or the couple and you learn some additional information. So it kind of unfolds across time. You can't just assume what you're initially given is all the information. David and his wife really want to maximize their kids' inheritance. It's important to them because they both grew up without money. And I also learned that they're pretty good with budgeting, and that's one of the reasons they were able to pay down their house. They're pretty certain they can live on $12,000 a month after taxes in retirement. So in our case, we would sit down and we would run some numbers for David and his spouse, create a retirement income forecast, and we would also evaluate the employee stock ownership plan as a percent of net worth, that concentration piece that we spoke about earlier. This is an example of the information we put in: desired monthly income, when you're actually going to retire, account values, contributions, and growth rates. I will point out for this example, we did use the 10% for the stock plan for the ESOP for a rate of return, and we used a 7%, a little bit more conservative number on 401k. So what did we learn when we did some forecasting? We looked at Social Security that David and his spouse might get. That's $4,000 a month. The stock plan could produce roughly $4,000 a month of income when converted to retirement income. And the 401k that David has could produce about $3,500 a month. We also learned that his wife's pension, she was actually a school administrator, is pretty robust at $4,500 a month. That's roughly $16,000 a month of income. The ESOP is about $4,000 of that 16. But remember, David and his wife were pretty confident they could live on $12,000 a month. Trevor, how would you think about applying the three lenses to this scenario?
He's clearly eligible to diversify. And the question is, should he? If the company had a downturn, overall, that fact pattern is not going to delay his retirement. His ESOP, while a pretty sizable balance, if you look at it just standalone, it's only 16% of the net worth. Given their income requirements, him and his wife's in retirement, the Social Security pension and 401k, that's going to cover it. So he's fine just with those before we even consider the ESOP.
So the outcome here is that David chose to hold the company stock for potentially a higher growth rate. He enjoys working and certainly is okay working till 67. So do you want to introduce our last case study?
Liz is 55 years old. She's at West Coast. So again, same company here, same overall economic factors with the company, but different factors with her on an individual level. She's been with West Coast for 25 years. ESOP account balance is 1.8 million. 401k, she has 590,000 and her salary is 250,000. And we're going to throw a wrinkle in here. She's recently divorced and does have a mortgage that pays off in 20 years. And she wants to retire in 7. She and her ex-husband just finished putting their 3 kids through college. So they got through that hurdle. That's a huge one. So she just received her first diversification notice and is curious, like, okay, I need to fill this out and return it if I want to do this. What should I do? So she calls you, Peter, and what are your thoughts?
Having a conversation with Liz, I learned that she wants stability and she really wants the flexibility to retire at 62. And she has a very strong desire for security, which is not surprising given that her and her ex-husband just did the heavy lift to putting 3 kids through college and just settled their divorce. By the way, all her numbers are post-divorce numbers that we went through. In this current environment, running the numbers, Liz's forecasted retirement income is $11,000 per month with what she has today if she retires in 7 years. That includes Social Security, 401k, and ESOP. But her stock plan is forecasted to provide about 60% of that income, so more than half of the income. Using the 3 lenses, as Trevor mentioned, she has to return the form within 30 days. The impact, even though West Coast Widgets has done very well, we did mention the construction industry, it can be cyclical. Her ESOP is over 70% of her net worth. And then diversification for Liz, the alignment piece, the decisions she's making align with her future desires, and she desires stability and security. So potentially diversifying to multiple stock fund holdings, as well as maybe some bond holdings, which might not have as high of a return, but would have a little bit more stable growth pattern, could improve the likelihood of her being able to retire securely at age 62. So what did Liz decide to do?
She decided to diversify her ESOP into an IRA. This was her first year, so she took out 25%. And the idea is to have safe and stable return until she retires at age 62.
In addition, when Liz rolled that over, we moved the money into an IRA and we made it a little bit less aggressive than a single stock holding with the investment mix, which means it won't go up and down as much with market fluctuations. And then because she just finished paying for college, she now has the cash flow available to max out her 401k contributions.
So there's 4 key benefits of diversifying. Unlock concentrated wealth, create income flexibility, reduce single company risk, and it might allow you to retire early.
Where I've seen potentially diversification being problematic is if you're going to retire in 6 months or 12 months or 18 months, you don't want to be caught on the wrong end of a downturn. So really kind of thinking ahead, should I diversify if my numbers show I can support my retirement lifestyle? Even if your company's doing really well, should you continue taking concentrated single stock risk? The other piece is don't ignore taxes. If you do decide to take a diversification or a distribution in a lump sum and cash the check as opposed to put it in an IRA or a 401k, those large distributions can trigger unexpected taxes. And then we have seen occasionally a delay of 12 or 18 months from when the time you hear about your diversification eligibility to actually getting paid. And make sure you have a liquidity, i.e. cash in the bank, when you need to cover expenses. How should folks think about their own situation?
First, define the targets. What does retirement actually look like for you from an income standpoint? Without that number, everything else is just noise. Assess a risk. So understand your current assets, any sort of concentration you have, and also how you can effectively manage those. Compare the paths. So we modeled out different scenarios, staying company stock or diversifying out. And within diversification, you have 2 options, rollover or pay the tax, use the cash. And finally, act with clarity. This is a thoughtful process. You're going to want to have checkpoints and get guidance. It's always good to get guidance and not try to make a decision in a vacuum. And Peter, walk us through how your team helps clients.
We have conversations with families and individuals about goal setting, including their desired retirement timeline, as well as going through their summary plan documents and understanding the rules of their unique situation. We will forecast out and model people's after-tax retirement income subject to the decisions they're making. And then we will advise on and implement diversification of concentrated stock. We actually manage investments for employee-owned participants, retirees, and pay them out a paycheck. And we actually send their money to the government to pay their estimated taxes. So they don't actually have to worry about doing that. And that's a big relief for folks. Book a strategy call. We can talk about where you stand in your ESOP timeline and really discuss whether you need an immediate diversification transaction or if you need to build out a comprehensive long-term plan. And that's a 30-minute no-cost call just to bring you some clarity about your unique situation.